Hey gardeners, Amy here with Garden Up, and today we are actually teaching a class in my backyard all about tree planting. I have with me Alan Vesley, 40-plus year arborist. We are going to go into lots and lots of details about lots of different things regarding planting trees. I have 2 fruit trees that we're going to plant today, and there's a lot to talk about with these. So grab some popcorn, sit back, and enjoy the video. Alright, so Alan, how do you want to teach today? What order of operations should we do here?
Well, I find it best to start with the tools that you are going to need. Then we move into selection of the plant, or if you've already got one. And then we'll move into the site preparation, and finally, planting the tree itself.
Excellent. And we do have an audience back behind the camera, so if they have any questions, we will include them in the video as well. Guys, just make sure to speak loudly so it can hear you. All right, take it away. What kind of tools do we need to plant a tree?
Well, obviously, you're going to need a shovel. You will need a rake, preferably a metal-tined one, a garden rake. It's going to help level things out afterwards. And you will need pruners for pruning on the root system, because almost every time, the way these guys grow in the pot, there are roots that are going to need to be pruned. We'll cover that in a minute.
You'll also need a hose with water so that you can wash that root ball. We're going to get into root washing and all of that stuff. And I prefer actually a garden fork for site prep myself. I like when I'm digging a new bed, I can sift out all the roots and stuff, which I haven't finished doing over here yet, but we'll do that while we go.
Next up, tree. This poor little guy has sat in a pot for a couple years.
It didn't look like this when I bought it, I swear.
This is no problem. I guarantee you, you're not the first person, and you won't be the last person to have a tree that they just don't get around to planting. As long as the tree's still got green, still got life, this isn't a problem. When you go to a nursery and you start looking for your tree that you want to get, don't worry about really so much what's below ground. That's all stuff that we're going to fix. What's above ground that you want to look for is something with a good branching structure that kind of radiates uniformly in all directions around the tree, not really so much lopsided. This guy's a little bare on one side. I'd look for something that's got a little bit more of the bigger branches that you see uniformly around the tree, just to give it a more even shape as it grows. As it grows, you're going to be pruning on this thing anyway, so you'll adjust the shape as time goes on. For now, you want something that's going to look good now. Second part when you're choosing a plant tree to put into the ground is before you buy the tree at all, look at your site. Where are you going to put it? Originally, this location was going to have a cherry tree planted in it. Cherry trees, do your research on your tree. First of all, find out how tall they're going to get. Then find out how wide they are going to get. In this case, a cherry tree averages about 60 feet tall and will spread out about 20-25 feet. The problem with that here is we have power lines and phone lines and everything above us. When this guy gets to maturity, it's going to be wrapping up in those. So when you are choosing your tree, take into account where you're going to plant, your obstacles. Are there fences? Are there underground lines? Are there overhead lines? Are there other trees in the way? Is there a house nearby? Buy the plant that will suit your location best, not something that's going to look pretty now. There's plenty of alternatives to the tree that you might most want that will be just as good but better suited to your environment. So do your research, ask around, find out what kind of plant, how it grows when you go to make your purchase. Make sure you get the right tree for your place. Instead of planting a cherry tree here, we're going to plant a peach tree here, because it only gets about 15 to 20 feet tall, which is still below the level of the high power, the high voltage line, and it can be maintained at an easier rate below. Peaches tend to grow a little more leafy looking, so that's another factor that's worth considering for this location.
The other thing that you really shouldn't do is what I did, which was, ooh, that's pretty, I'm going to take 2. Don't do that. We all do it. I am no exception. I don't have space, but I want one. I'll find room. Here, this is me finding room.
So on your plant selection, obviously you don't want to find branches that have dead on them or the like as much as possible. If you find one that does have some, don't worry about it. That kind of stuff gets pruned off.
How long would you wait to prune the top of the tree after planting? Like a season?
Next season. If you plant in the fall, you'll be pruning in the fall.
Okay.
If you plant in the spring, you'll be pruning in the spring. Eventually, with fruit trees, you kind of want to get where you prune consistently in the spring, before or late fall. The ideal time for Most fruit trees is actually during the winter, and this is according to the fruit tree growers of places like Green Bluff and Otis Orchard. They do all their pruning in the winter time. Apples are best in March or February. Cherries and that family are best in March.
Well, that's why the Spirit did that big tree pruning class in February a couple of years ago.
Yes.
So say what you were going to say again about not pruning the top.
Old practices, 30, 40 years ago, you plant your tree and then you prune it. Well, since then they found out that when you're pruning off material up here to kind of match up the bottom, you're actually stunting the tree because it's not photosynthesizing the sugars and nutrients it needs to support that root development. So anymore, it's come about to, if you prune the roots, don't prune the top. If you prune the top, don't prune the root.
Another little bit about that I learned when I was in school is that the growth hormones and nutrients that leaves need in order to grow top growth are stored in the roots, and vice versa. Which seems like an energy sink, because whenever you have to, you want to grow more leaves, you have to pull the nutrients up from the roots. But it makes a lot of sense, because if you lose top growth, if the energy for that growth was stored up there, you lost that too. So it keeps its stuff in opposite places so that it can replace what it loses whenever it needs it. So you don't want to cut the top when you're trying to get it to establish more roots, etc.
That basically is how nature ensures that no matter what happens to this tree, whether a rodent from underground or a tree from above crushing, it's going to keep going, because all the things that it needs are stored either up here for the roots, down there for the tree, going to ensure this guy keeps going. Plants don't like to go quietly. I love that part.
Real quick, Alan, one more specific question on this tree, and I'll get close-ups to the video. So this tree had shot-hole fungus. Whether it came with it or whether it got it from my weeping cherry, I don't know. But I kept picking infested leaves off all summer because I didn't want it to get worse. And I think I more or less got it under control at the expense of a lot of leaves. But there are some branches here and back here that look really dead. This one's shriveled. We cut that out.
The dead can be pruned out at any time. The question is it truly dead, or is it going dormant because of the conditions it's in? If it is shriveled, if it is showing desiccation marks on the trunk, then yeah, that is definitely gone. Go ahead and prune it out. Yeah. Otherwise, leave it. Leave it for a season. Wait till spring goes around. When the new growth begins in spring after planting, you will know what's made it and what didn't.
There we go.
Then you prune. But the best thing to do for now, even though we see some branches that look dead, they may not be dead. They may be simply recuperating and preserving itself from the extreme heat and drought that we have had. That is common for actually prunus member family trees to do, is shed leaves and play dead during the worst droughts and heat, and then they come right back as soon as it gets wet. So the best thing to do here, when you're planting a new tree, if you're not absolutely 100% certain whether the branch is alive, leave it alone. Wait till next season. When the tree starts to grow and recover and do its thing again, you'll know what didn't make. Prune that off then.
Are we going to leave the sucker?
No, those never stay. So we will get to his removal, part of the reason you need pruners. Let's get to site preparation. Ideally, around any given tree, you want to dig a hole about 3 to 4 feet across. It does not need to be deep. Mostly what you are wanting to do is break up the soil, loosen it up. Never, 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 never amend the soil. Do not add compost into where you're going to plant the tree. Do not add fertilizers. Don't add anything. The reason of this is relatively simple. When you dig this bowl here, when you disturb the soil here to plant your tree, and you put all these wonderful, nice nutrients in here for that tree to baby it, help it, that's great. The tree is going to grow out through all that, relishing life, loving it, till it gets to that edge, where now we went from the dessert buffet to grandma's oatmeal.
Oatmeal. That's
right.
Awesome.
Kind of bland out there. Not much to want to attract the roots out further. Not much to make them want to go exploring. Yeah, you could water, but they're guarantee you them roots are still going to want to stay right here where you've dug all that stuff into. What winds up happening in the long run, and Amy has seen this as well, this essentially becomes a bowl of death.
This basically
The
is a
roots
new
don't
pot.
go.
They never go past it, which means you're not going to get the stabilization, and eventually one windstorm, tree's going to fall over.
Or you can wind up with a bowl if you're like in heavy clay soil, and you put in amendments to break that up. that soil will hold that water there before it seeps out into the clay and you'll drown your tree. And if you've got super sandy soil, you go the other way, super sandy soil, and you mix clay and stuff in there to help hold the moisture. Same problem. That area is going to hold that water before it seeps into the surrounding terrain, and you will drown the tree first. 10,000 problems come with trying to make the soil better. Don't do it. If you want to do it for your annuals, your perennials, great. They'll benefit. They don't have roots that go beyond this. Trees, their roots are eventually going to go so far out. You would be surprised. 3 times their height out they can go. So this little guy here, a year or so from now, they'll be quite a distance out. And every year, they'll move. What we want to do when creating the site, when prepping the site, is loosen that soil up to make it easier for this guy's newly forming roots to get moving through the soil. We also want that soil to compact back down to normal over time through rain and water, so that by the time the roots get out to the edge of that bowl, they don't notice the difference anymore. It's still the same soil that they just keep digging through. Maybe a little tougher, but the roots will compensate for that. That's what we want. We want the soil to be, we want to fool the tree into thinking it's in the normal ground, and it'll just keep growing. So ideally, your hole, you want 3 to 4 feet across from the center, and it doesn't need to be anything more than just turned up and turned over.
If you do need a soil amendment, do you top dress?
Top dressing, definitely. If you want to put compost, mulches, anything, fertilizers even, always on the top. Nature will water the top, rain those nutrients, it'll absorb the leach the nutrients out of the compost, out of the mulches, out of the fertilizers, down into the soil, the way nature has been doing it long before we came along to help. That's the ideal way to do it. If you go out into the wilderness and look around, the trees are growing out there, the compost from the leaves is on the surface. Nobody is turning it in, nobody is mixing it in. Trees are growing just fine.
Well, the worms are a little bit, but I mean, again,
but that's an active agent of nature. That's what we are hoping will happen here as well. So compost, manures, all the amendments that you want to put in the ground, put on top instead. Best option. After you've got your soil turned, weed it, of course, and all the fun stuff first.
So since grass is usually the thing you're going to be fighting with site prep and whatnot, I do have a video on removing grass, the different types, and how to get the different types gone. So I'll link that one in the description below. Check that out if it is of interest to you.
Very useful.
Several different growth structures of grass, and in order to beat the grass that you have in your garden, you really want to know which kind you're battling.
Once you got your hole dug, or your site turned up, you actually dig the hole. Pretty self-explanatory from there. About the same pot size, roughly. Maybe a little bit bigger, because when we get into this pot and start breaking the dirt and soil out of there, we're actually going to be unfolding some of the roots too. We're going to be, I guarantee you, they're curled around that inside. So we want to have room for the roots to be expanded outward. How deep do you dig the hole? That's a good question.
Deeper than the pot.
You'd actually be surprised at how deep you don't need to dig.
Yeah, a lot of trees you only need to go about 6 or 7 inches if you watch the roots to find out that there's really not that much.
Yeah, big pot. There's not as much root as you might think is there.
There is one thing, and you said to ignore what's in the pot. There's one thing I look for in trees though, and that's I always check to make sure there's no girdling roots.
It can be hard to find girdling roots.
If they're above the pot, I mean, like,
yeah.
It's pretty obvious.
And even then it can still be hard to tell, is it truly a girdling root? Most of your girdling roots will be up close to the trunk and found down near the root flare. Let's just get into digging this apart so that we can actually cover whether we found girdling roots.
So I bought this tree 2 years ago as a bare root tree. Kindly, they put it in a pot for me with soil, and I was intending to plant it within a month or 2, of course. Never did that.
2 years later and a baby.
Yeah, so 2 years and a baby later. What does this root ball look like? I have no idea. It was beautiful when I bought it, but I don't know if it still does, so let's find out.
One big challenge you will face with any tree, how do you get it out of the pot, especially the bigger the pot? Old landscaper trick. I'm an old landscaper, so here's the trick. Easy way to get them out is just That easy. If it still sticks a little bit when you're pulling it out, give it one more right on the bottom. Comes right out. Everything today pertains specifically to trees. Not bushes, not annuals, not perennials, just trees. All right, we've got our guy out of the pot, and now we really need to look at the root structure on this, because that's the most important part of the tree. You might think it's this part above, but actually almost every single problem that begins in a tree starts in the root system. We make sure the root system is properly cared for. We make sure that this tree's got the best start it can on life. So the first thing we're going to do is get rid of as much dirt, soil around this as my soils teacher would kill me. We want to get rid of the soil. Everybody says don't break the root ball. The reason of that is because you want to keep the absorbing roots that are in here damp. That root ball helps protect those absorbing roots that are closest in by holding the moisture around them. Well, we're going to wash the dirt away, so we're going to be able to keep those absorbing roots moist and not have a problem.
Are we going to put the tree over on the garden then, so I don't have to get soil all on the lawn?
Well, I'll go over here.
Yeah, perfect.
And yep, we're going to make a mess. We've got right here a good healthy main root starting to show up. This is one of the roots that we want to see, because this is going to be one of the ones that ties up to where the root flare of the tree is. Root flare of the tree is the most important part of the tree. It is that union where when the seed falls to the ground, the trunk grows upward and the roots go down. The roots are used to burrowing into the soil. They're used to going through the ground. That is what they have been made to do, dig through the ground. The trunk and everything above, not so much. It is very important to make sure that the trunk is above ground, because when it gets dirt, soil up against the trunk, it starts to constrict it. It acts like a rubber band around the wrist. It slowly but surely, as this tree expands, puts pressure on the vascular system. At first, you won't notice anything, but maybe a little tingling. Then we start to turn red, then purple, then we have problems. Having this trunk too deep is the bulk of a lot of problems. The root flare, which we'll discover here in a minute, has to sit at ground level. Another arborist once said, and I love this expression, planted too high, never dies. Planted too low, sure to go. So we're going to find our root flare.
While he's doing that, I can attest to, I have seen at least 2 or 3 times the trunk of the tree above the ground was good and wide and gaining girth, but it was planted too deep. And as soon as you went below the soil grade, pencil thin base, because the trunk could not push the soil out of the way. And so you had this nice wide tree on this little tiny narrow stick. It was gonna fall over eventually. Luckily I caught it in time, was able to pull the soil back. I hope that's enough to save it. Most of those trees I haven't seen for years.
Actually, it should be.
It should be, right?
Once you remove the pressure that soil is creating around a trunk, the tree will recover from it. It will start putting out normal growth. It will still be condensed at first, but given water, given fertilizers to help it overcome that choke point, it will regrow. So if you have planted things too deeply, if you first planted, you don't see that root flare, you can dig around. You can pull that soil back, which is kind of what we're doing here. We're pulling that soil back and away until we can see where the root flare begins. In this particular case, on this tree, the root flare is definitely right here. Here's the big main root. These are all other roots coming off of this. I'll bring this up closer and show you a little better. But here's your main root. These are all good secondary roots coming off. This is our root flare right through here. This is what we want to see sitting right at surface level. It's okay if we see a few roots. You see them all the time around big mature trees. The roots don't care. They'll take care of themselves. They'll dig into the ground as they need to. This is what we need above ground here. So continue our exposition of the root ball here.
So, are you making a well to put that tree in?
In essence, yeah, this whole thing is kind of a well.
But I mean, is it going to be below the actual ground thing? You're making a well?
I usually just
There will
make
be a
moat.
little trough around to help hold water and keep it contained, but overall, if that trough wasn't there, the ground would be level. And the trough is only going to be there for one season just to help water stay in local to this region, which is what you want most, where the most absorbing roots are currently.
Okay.
And
So you're going to have the root ball at the top of the existing ground.
Correct.
Okay.
When this is all said and done, and this is all leveled out, and the tree is planted, you will see this part of the tree and flat ground.
Okay.
I'll build a little bit of a rim just to help keep water. By next season, that rim doesn't even need to be there. Technically, it doesn't need to be there at all. It's more a convenience depending upon how you have the water. If you had an irrigation system that covered the area just fine, you wouldn't need that trough. It's very interesting that we're only getting a hollow spot there.
Yeah, so again, it was bare root when I bought it. And I think this one they had to really squish to get into the pot because they had quite a few anchor roots. It's really nice one.
All I'm doing is continuing to loosen up the root mass, continuing to work the soil as much as possible away. And again, we're eliminating some of that material that you start. Compost, that it's all that added material that we don't want to see in a hole. It's not native soil. Are you going to get rid of it all? Probably not. As much as possible is the ideal.
The fact that that tree's been in the pot for 2 years with that good soil and not knowing anything else, now you're putting it into native soil, is that going to have an adverse effect on it?
Not really. And it's kind of why we want to get rid of this stuff here. This is what it's always going to be growing in from now on, not this. Even though it may have been growing in this and is used to this, this is not what it's going to be in. We want to favor the native soil it will actually be growing in. This will trap it here. It will make that bowl of death in a tiny little space.
If I planted a tree last year and I didn't do what you're doing, is it too late to dig it up and start over?
No. And actually, great question. A recently planted tree, within, say, 2 years, you can still dig them. Within 1 year, you can almost dig the exact same hole. Within 2, you want to move out at least 6 inches and dig it there. You will be cutting some of the roots and stunting it a little bit, but it will be fine as long as you move outward. At 3 years in the ground, you're going to want to look at more just exposing the root flare by hand and leaving the tree be. I have had to dig 8 foot and more deep sometimes to expose the root flare. In the long run, it's best for the tree to just do it. Doesn't matter the hole you leave, just do it. If you can dig out around or whatever, you can dig the tree and raise it, that's ideal. If not, just clearing that away from the trunk is, yes, just must do.
So this apple tree I have back in the corner over there, if any of you weren't here earlier when Alan and I were talking about it, that was an experiment. It was a Costco tree, because I had to see, like, $20 trees, come on, what is this? In a bag that's, smaller than my leg. How do you fit all the roots into that little bag? Well, I got my answer. The bag actually holds the trunk, and there are no roots. There's no anchor roots. They're all cut off, and there was 1 or 2 feeder roots, and that was it. So I bought 5 trees. 1 of them is still alive. Okay. Now I did screw up one thing with the planting, and that is I should have taken it out of the bag and put it into a bucket of water first to get those roots going. Instead, I just put it straight into the wet hole. Don't know if that would have made much of a difference. It may have. I don't know. But we're going to be excavating that tree because the snow last year knocked it over. So, but Alan said we should do that in the spring when there's no leaves and no heavy fruit and stuff like that. It'll be easier to do that come early spring. What did you say, March?
Yeah, March, April, whenever the ground is workable and the tree is kind of showing signs of waking up.
Yeah. And that'll be easier to get back to so you don't be stepping on as many things either.
Again, here the most important thing is just making sure these roots stay damp.
Now, how do you go about this when the tree is really pot down and you can't get a tool in there or water or anything to get that soil out?
If you run into this situation, and it will happen, where you absolutely cannot get this root mass to break up at all, do the best that you can to split open the sides and get that worked out as much as possible. There will be times where you just can't. The best thing to do in that case is prune a root to get it to loosen up. And when I say prune a root, I'm not talking about like cutting one of these big honking guys here. These are the main support roots. But littler guys like this, if they're tying things up, it's okay to prune a little guy. Anything smaller than your finger, your pinky, is probably not going to hurt the plant if you trim it. They'll grow around that. Much bigger than that, you're going to be looking at one of the main roots that feed the tree.
You cut it up with a saw or anything like that?
I just use pruner. It depends upon whether, what works really.
Yeah.
I have seen situations where you couldn't get a pruner in there and it took grabbing a knife in there to break the root ball up.
You told me about one time where there was an axe involved.
That has happened too.
It was an experiment he told me about where there was 3 different plots of trees to try to see which planting technique is actually healthier and to, what's it called when they debunk the myths, right? And they took some straight out of the pot and put it in the ground, and then they stirred up the roots a little bit and put it in the ground, and then the third batch, they hacked them into pieces with an axe and put them in the ground, and those ones did the best.
They literally,
5, 10, 20 years later, they were the only ones doing well, right?
where this information is coming from is partly all of my own learning as well, but Bartlett, when I worked at Bartlett Tree Experts, they confirmed and showed all this stuff as well. And they quite literally said one of the trees that they planted that was just as healthy as a horse compared to the other two, they literally took one out of the pot in the ground, and it looked like this. The one that the guy said he took out of the pot and literally was just beating on. This is, I kid you not, he said he was demonstrating, beating this thing on the ground, knocking the soil off, kicking it around, chopping on the thing. The tree was 3 times healthier than the one that they just stuck in the ground. This is ultimately what we want to see before planting. We want to be able to see this entire root structure. This is what we've been working for. And the root flare is this area right here. You can see where it transitions from the bark look to this different texture, different coloration. 99% of the time it'll be that way. This is the point where the root flare begins. We want to see just that. We have a lot of roots in here going every which way we don't want. If we can move them so that they move outward, we're going to try to do that, straighten them out. A lot of these are quite brittle, that's the nature of the tree. They don't want to bend. If, like this one, he's curling back underneath, that is not going to support this tree in the long run of things. Any root that's not going out and away from the trunk is not doing its job. Just like above it, you want everything to go away from the trunk. You do want the same thing down below with the root system. You want things to go out and away. If they're not doing it, off they go. This branch, now that it's been cut, will develop new ones. Just like the top, when you prune off on the top, it encourages new growth below. These guys as well. When you prune a root, it encourages more growth. I can tell by this big root here, all the little ones. This one was cut at one point. We got all the little roots coming in. Now, if today was about 10 degrees, 15, 20 degrees hotter, I'd be running for the water to keep this thing down. Fortunately, we're cool today. Got a couple roots here on the underside. This one in particular, coming out of the center, kind of going nowhere. Not that great of a root under there. Do you leave it? Do you cut it out? In this particular case, we've got a whole ton of roots going over that direction already. We don't need him under there being problematic. This little guy over here, coming out, he's going to be underneath the rest of the roots. Trees, they don't care about that fact, but he's going where we want him. We're going to leave him. We are ready to plant the tree. First thing you do, saturate your soil. Get your soil that you're going to plant in wet. Because everything with a new tree hinges on one thing, having enough moisture that this guy can absorb what it needs to support the rest of the tree. Because this is what will support this. As long as these little fine roots down here stay damp. Ideally, when you put the tree in the ground, you want to face it so that it looks good for you. The other thing to consider is, where are the roots going? This one, they all want to go uphill. We're going to let them go uphill so they don't go invade a neighbor.
Yeah.
They'll do that eventually anyway, but hey, we want to try to prevent any potential suckers that may occur or may not. If planted right, you shouldn't get them. But if they do, let's keep them on our side of the property line.
Not to mention, I have no idea what chemicals my neighbors use, so this actually makes me happy having all the roots staying in my yard, where I don't have to worry about herbicides and stuff on the other side of the fence.
Okay. Firstly, I know my soil level is about here. That's still a little high.
This is how I do it.
That's pretty much, yeah. Still a little high. All
Soil
that
is
water
also-
I put in there, look at that.
It's hydrophobic. Look at that. It's so dry. The water's just bouncing around on the top of the soil and not soaking in.
And I'll tell you, the reason that's occurring is you have organic matter in here. And organic matter, when it dries out, creates a hydrophobic acid that repels water. That's why it's so very important to get the soil wet first, is so that if those organic materials have dried out to the point that they are creating that water repelling acids, we can start breaking that down and getting it out of there so that the ground will stay hydrated and the tree will get the water it needs. But we don't want soup either. All right, depth test. We are right about where we want to be now. Possibly a little on the high side, which is just fine. Better high than low. Those roots from that other little...
I was going to say, is that the other shrub?
Yeah, that's the other bug. That's the other guy. From there, you just fill it in. Periodically, especially in the case of soil like this that is so dry, add water. Hydrate as much as possible throughout the process. Water will also help it wash in between the root system. And that is a planted tree.
It's a little crooked on this side, Alan. Should we... How hard are you compacting the soil?
Not at all.
There you go.
I'm going to let nature do the compacting.
So the whole stepping on the loose soil, we
Don't
don't
do
do
it.
that anymore.
Don't do it. You know, my patting the soil down around like that, just by hand, I barely put any real weight. It's more just to keep dirt from blowing everywhere, making certain it's a little bit packed in around the top of there. But really, no weight, no pressure. We want nature to pack this down normally. And it'll do it through rainfall. But as I said, regarding your question earlier about the trough, by and large, this tree is at ground height, ground level across. The moat was just there to help keep the water in. When, for new trees, this really works good. If they need extra water, really will when it's hot. Ultimately, does it need the trough? No. The trough is there just to help hold that little extra for this guy while he's getting started. If you've got an irrigation system that'll water all the surrounding area well, then you don't need it. They recommend at least an inch of water a day. How much is an inch of water a day? Well, here's the easy way to fix that problem. Get yourself a cup, a little teacup or something like that.
Tuna can.
Put them, tuna can, great one.
Yeah.
Hadn't thought of a tuna can.
Yeah, that's the best one.
Set them around the yard, turn your irrigation on. Tuna can's about an inch thick. If it fills up within 1 hour's worth of running, you're getting an inch an hour. Fills up faster than that, tells you what you need to know. Fills up slower than that, again, adjust your timing. But they recommend an inch of water every 2 to 3 days for everything. That's how you can find out if you're getting enough water. A little tuna can test. I like the tuna can. I've been sitting there thinking cups, trying to come up with something that would work. Tuna can.
Yeah.
Nah.
That is so much water. I think this back section of my yard, I probably watered about 5 to 10 times all year. It's super
And this is
thirsty.
the other 5 to 10 times this year.
Yeah, yeah, it's getting more water right now than I've given it.
Alan, is the little roots connecting to the tree that are exposed, is that okay, or do we need to put a little more dirt on soil?
Okay, question was, are all these roots sitting up here just fine the way they are, or should we cover them with dirt? Goes back to too high, never die, too low, sure to go. We don't want to be deeper than this. We do not want this to be buried at all. Anything below that, if it's above ground, not really a big issue. The tree will cope with it. As long as we don't see the very end hanging out there in space, flopping around, we want that underground. But a little bit of exposure like this, that is no big deal at all to the tree. It will develop bark, it will develop all the things it needs to protect itself around there, and it will dive under the ground and keep on going. The roots being out of the ground is not as big an issue as the trunk being underground. That trunk cannot be underground.
Is this for all trees, or just fruit trees, or?
All trees.
So
It
if I
doesn't
go
matter.
out and I buy an 8-foot spruce and it comes in a gigundous ball wrapped in burlap with wires connecting them.
Oh, yeah.
Get rid of it all.
Let's talk about baskets, shall we?
Baskets,
Oh, my
yeah,
goodness.
do not let baskets sit on, they're just bad. They don't break down. You're talking about 100-year plus process for that basket to break down by corrosion. Your tree won't even live that long, and more frequently what will happen is they'll try to grow through that basket. The holes in those baskets vary about that big. Well, the roots are going to get that big in time. And trying to grow through those little metal holes, that'll wind up girdling that root. And then you wind up with half your tree dying because that supporting root didn't make it.
That's if the roots ever get out of the basket at all.
See if the roots get out of the basket.
If you got burlap inside the basket, they're not getting out of that. It's going to be in that ball shape forever.
Burlap, do not bury it. Do not leave it in the ground. Get rid of it. Yes, it will decompose. No, it will not decompose in 5 years. It takes 10, 15, 20. I have come across pieces of burlap still intact, jute burlap, 25 years after the tree's been planted. There's a nursery out here that says, we won't guarantee it if you remove the cage. Great. Don't guarantee it. I don't care. You follow these instructions. You plant that tree like this, it's going to live anyway.
I'd say, how long is the guarantee? It'll guarantee that it dies, and then you get a new tree. Isn't that
Uh-huh.
great? Yeah, that's a lot of work.
I have planted thousands of trees across 40 plus years. This is the way I've been doing it from day one.
Said nothing goes in the soil, but what if you have really rock hard clay and you fill it with water and it doesn't even drain? You got a bowl of water there. Can I add anything to the soil?
Don't. Your best thing to do when dealing with hard clay soil is just turn it up. Run a rototiller through it. Run a chainsaw, whatever.
Pickaxe.
Well,
I think
you
that's
ever see
quite the
those
right-
trenching tools?
The trenchers, yes,
The
not a
trencher.
chainsaw. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Let's use the right
Well,
tool,
when you
Alan.
get, trust me, there's some soils that's like, but don't amend it, period. Heavy clay soils have a tendency to impede root growth, which kind of stunts the tree. Not a bad thing. The tree will just keep growing anyway. It's not going to stop it. The soil type really does not matter what you have.
So those roots can get through that concrete soil.
They can.
Okay.
And the fact that we have cypress growing in swamps, where that is silt compacted upon silt, compacted upon silt. We've got trees up on mountaintops. Look at where plant life grows. You can't tell me that your soil type isn't duplicated somewhere, but there's a tree growing. And it's someplace growing in the wild. The type of compost doesn't matter. Mulch compost will help water stay in the ground, will help it from evaporating, which is ideal. So yes, some form of a compost, some form of a mulch over the top is a good idea. Do you have to have it? Nope. Tree planting class I had this spring, they're looking just like this. There's nothing around them or anything like that, and they are thriving. My God, they are thriving. Similar soil type to what you've got here as well. But across all the time. Do this, follow these simple things. If your tree is planted too deep, expose that root flare. Dig down, pull it out. Your tree will recover. Your tree will be happier. This guy, I have no doubt, she'll post a video in about 2 years. Goes, oh my God, wait till you see what happened.
Yeah, right. Oh, hey, real quick, let's talk about staking and drip irrigation around the trunk.
I'm going to start with the no-no, drip irrigation.
Should you put it right up next to the trunk, Alan?
Talk about a leading question.
Yeah, there's a reason I'm asking it.
Drip irrigation is ideal for everything but a tree. Can you use it on a tree? Yes. Should you? Not really. And the main reason of this is drip irrigation waters a small area for the most part. And right now, the absorbing roots on this tree, trees have two areas where you'll see absorbing roots. And it's based on the simple function of the tree. Trees are designed to funnel water one of two places. Down the trunk to the roots, the absorbing roots here, or you've all heard of the drip line, they shed the water outward. And that's to where the other set and the more abundant set of absorbing roots are. They're going out this way. As this tree gets bigger, as this tree grows, with a drip irrigation system watering in here, well, that's great. What about these roots? They're going outward. They're spreading outward.
My favorite is when they put those cute little drip line rings right around the trunk base. And in a few years, it's not only not doing anything, but rotting the trunk. It's girdling the trunk. And it's like, who did that and why? This is dumb. So
you can use drip irrigation to help establish a tree, but it should not be the main source of water. Your first year, if you've got drip line watering this area that you dug up to prep for the tree, first 2 years, great. After that, his roots are now going out past that. And if you don't adapt the drip line to compensate for that root growth all the way around the tree, your tree is going to be water stressed, and you will see that sign. Your best bet is to put the tree near where you've got a major source of irrigation, like near a lawn. Guarantee you his roots are going to go invade your lawn. They just do.
whatever, they'll be below most of it.
But they'll be below. They get the water. And this is why that 1 inch of watering is so crucial. It gets the water below the grass and down to where the tree roots are. Trees, their root systems exist within the top 12 to 24 inches of the soil. So here sits your soil, here's your tree roots. Everybody else, all your berries, all your annuals, all your perennials, they're up here. That hour's worth of watering, that 1 inch worth of watering that you try to obtain, gets that water down past these guys to the trees that need it. That's why it's so critical to water everywhere and not use drip line. It's good for a start. It is not good for maintenance.
Okay, on cleanup, but go ahead and just grab some of the soil and throw it on there, and then I have a trick.
You say throw it on there.
On the planting hole or on the tree or some such.
That's what I thought you meant.
Yep. But when you have a whole bunch of dirt left over,
Like we do.
yeah, well, mainly in the grass, just rake it. Just rake the grass, and it settles down in there and visually goes away. So you don't have clumps of dirt killing your lawn.
And it adds nice soil to the top, to the lawn.
Exactly, you're top dressing the lawn.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, the other thing I said was stakes.
Stake.
When, how, why, and when not. That's really
Staking a tree. Is it something that's necessary? Is it something that's not? Depends upon how windy the area you are in is. If you're up on the 5 Mile Prairie area or someplace where there's a lot of wind all the time, stake your tree. Figure out what direction, what's your predominant wind direction. Now for most of Spokane it is southwest. You want to put 2 stakes on the windward side and 1 on the leeward side. The leeward side is the direction the wind is blowing. For this tree here, if I were to put a stake, I would put 1 here. The other 2, you want to split? Well, make a peace sign without the middle. So you're basically making a triangle. 1 over here, 1 over here. The windward side ones will help deal with the variations that'll come out of your normal flow of wind. The one on behind, well, we always get those ones that want to come this way, the other direction. That's the primary one. When you stake, don't stake it rigid. You want the tree to wiggle. You want the tree to move. Nature does that normally. That process of wiggle, that process of sway, actually causes little tiny micro breaks in the root system, but those breaks heal stronger for it. Same with the branches. The wind causes that flexion, causes micro breaks, but they strengthen up for it. So we want to see movement in the tree. We don't want to see it thrashing around like, a hurricane is going along when it's 5 miles an hour, but we want to see it wiggle. This is about appropriate. Anything more than this, tighten it up.
Less than that's the big problem, though, because that creates weak spots
Yeah.
and everything else.
If you aren't wiggling, if you can't wiggle about this much, and if you look down here at the ground, you see it is just wiggling a little bit. Newly planted tree, that's fine. A little bit of wiggle, peachy. If I were to show you that tree over there, which is sitting in sand and hadn't been getting a lot of water, its wiggle, I can stand the tree up from this angle.
Costco tree.
That's way too much. That tree, no. I can't wait to fix that tree.
Right, me too.
But a little wiggle, great. What do you use for material? You can use anything soft. They've also got some plastic chain link looking thing. I don't know what that stuff is called. I don't know what it is.
I call it tree strap. I don't know.
It's fairly expensive. If you use wire, protect it under a hose or wrap it in several layers of cloth. Ultimately, you don't want to create damage to the tree. To anchor them to the tree isn't really that important, so long as you don't put them all around the exact same point. Again, we want to avoid girdling the tree, and that's what around the same point does. If you can space them 2 to 3 inches apart, that's your ideal. Your high and low should be to one side, your mid should be to the non-weedy side. That is pretty much everything in a nutshell that I can think of off the top of my head anymore.
Yeah, right?
Then with that,
I think we'll wrap up this part and we can go do the other tree.
And then go up to the other tree up there and get it planted.
Perfect. I was going to ask if you guys want to plant this one.
Say it's bigger a 3-foot pole, 3 or 4 foot pole, and since she wants it as far this way as possible, figure here's your edge. Circle.
Yeah, very nice circle.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to plan where you're going to put the soil because it's got to go somewhere. So you've got a nice big wide swat.
Ideally, the first round, you just want to turn the soil.
Yeah, okay.
Turn it.
Yeah.
Break it up. It's more important to just break it up than anything.
So now start doing the ball.
Okay. Yep. Nice and soft everywhere. And we only need a hole about that big around right there. So as long as we've been turned up, turned around there, we're good. So now just pull the soil out.
Oh, well, because I didn't actually see the whole one.
And that's probably plenty deep for now.
See how much I trust them? Easy peasy.
It works like a charm.
Yeah. Alright, so now, should we hose it off in the grass over here?
I would do it back there.
Yeah. Want to get your hands on it?
Right. Yeah, this gets muddy. It gets messy. There's no other. Don't even try to be clean. That's where the water helps.
You're being a gardener. Get dirty.
Yeah. But get vigorous. Yeah, it takes patience.
Where's
It's
your,
kind of time consuming.
Plate
but-
table.
Yeah, I was kind of, watching that. Hey, you were just taking your time. Would it help to, put it in a bucket of water if you have a bunch? No.
No. The only reason you might want to put it in a bucket of water is if it's really, really, really dry.
Now you guys can be my official tree planters.
Yeah.
Yeah. That almost sounded enthusiastic.
Almost.
Well, I was like, yeah, we know how to do this.
You do now.
So this is the root,
That's the flare right there.
Yep.
so that's where you want it level
You want that
with the soil.
just slightly above level.
Okay.
You want to be able to see it clearly. You know,
Okay.
it should be the kind of thing where I can stand over here, look over there, and say, "Oh yeah, that's a root flare." All right, yeah, we're looking pretty good. I'd say we are about at tree planting stage. Okay.
Are there any roots we need to prune out? Is the next
If you
question.
wanted to put the soil that was in the pot on top,
On
can you do
top.
that?
Yes.
Only if you want to.
Yeah. And it's actually not even a bad idea because there's a lot of nutritional value in that stuff. It's usually a compost.
Okay.
So putting it on
It's
top.
a great,
Absolutely, yeah.
great top dress.
Okay.
And that's what I will do with that soil over there. Is I'm going to let it
Oh.
top dress my grapes and then move the rest back over to the tree.
Okay.
But because yeah, right where it's sitting is just walkway. I don't need lots of happy things growing there.
Yeah.
Are you done with the water? No, you got to put it in the hole still.
So we're going to need to plant and everything else first.
See if it needs to
Don't
be
Okay,
want
so
that
let's
in
check-
the water. We don't want that. Yeah, don't want that in the hole just yet. Okay. Toss in the raspberries.
We have to check to see if it needs to
Yeah,
be
so
pruning.
we wanna
Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, we got roots pointing outward, pointing outward, pointing outward. This one's kind of curling back. Can we make them? Yes, they're flexible. We can make them straighten out. These guys, these are all little guys. These are absorbing roots. These guys don't matter quite so much.
The little hairy
It's,
ones.
yeah, they're just absorbers. They're the ones that we want to protect from getting too dry. Aside from that, I would say everything looks like it's going to go where we want to do. So now we see we got some of these roots that don't want to kind of cooperate with us. So first we check the height of it. Are we about surface level? Yep, we are good.
I would even bring it up just a little bit.
So,
Mom, look at that one. And then we're
Cute.
gonna try to get these.
and that's what we're going to do next. As we go a little
I
more.
thought we might want it. I think Amy, you want it more on this side, right? Did we?
Yeah, as
Ish.
far this way.
Yeah,
as
yeah, yeah.
possible.
As far as we can,
Okay.
but you don't have to
To
go
allow for
down.
root growth and everything like that.
Okay.
So as we straighten these roots out, we're going to want to kind of attach dirt. We want it to go as straight out as possible, and then put the dirt around so it goes where we want it to go. Come onto this side, and okay, water. Start washing this into the shower. Yeah, that kind of helps get a little more pressure to wash things underneath.
Do you want to hold the tree so it's grown straight up?
Oh, yeah.
And then they can just mess with, yep, perfect. And then they can mess with the bottom.
Okay. These little roots up here, these smaller little guys, are adventitious roots. It's the bigger ones that were lower that were the ones we wanted to see. Adventitious roots, prune them off. They're not there. All too frequently, adventitious roots have a tendency to grow around the trunk. As they start, it's basically they get friction from the trunk as opposed to the soil, and so they start to curl. And pretty soon they're growing all the way around, and as they get bigger and thicker, and well, yeah.
That's probably perfect for water.
Yep. Right. Nice. Now we just make it close if we need to.
Yay! Is that so? Ah!
Beautiful.
Now the part that'll give you the biggest giggle is that's about how long it actually takes to plant a tree.
Right?
When you're not talking in between.
Right, yeah, exactly. I was going to say, because root washing adds a significant amount of time, it does.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, that's the
you know, for the benefits, the results you get, it's so worth it. All right, so thanks everybody for attending. Thank you so much all for watching. I hope you learned something and that this was valuable to you. Thank you, Alan, for helping me put this class together. He did all the work, I just offered the place.
Very vital.
Yeah, kind of important. Anyway, anything else? Any ending thoughts?
That is it. If you follow the instructions, you will have trees that are going to grow happily, healthily, and probably outlive you as well.
Probably. Okay, guys, thanks again for watching.
Happy gardening.
I'll see you in the garden.